Good afternoon, and it's wonderful to be with you. Colleagues, it's really lovely to be back with you after our time at the IEC Center, at the Results Center. Quite a tectonic and shape-shifting moment for our country. The 2024 election has proven itself to be. So I'd like to start off asking each of you to tell me what in the results really stood out for you as noteworthy. What was it that surprised you and made you sit up and pay close attention? Rebecca Davis, if I can start with you, that would be great.
Hi, Ferial. Thank you. I think we all know that the ultimate story of the elections is the emergence of the MK party, but on the understanding probably that we're going to talk about that a lot. Something that really has interested me is COPE, the Congress of the People. You know, we've been spending a lot of time talking about how extraordinary it is that the MK party will be sending 58 MPs to the National Assembly on their electoral debut. The comparison many of us have made, including me, is with the EFF, which, when they first emerged in what was the 2014 elections, took 6% of the vote. They sent 25 MPs. But that was eclipsed by COPE. You know, it's easy for us to forget that. 2009, the first elections that the Congress of the People, led by Terra Lakota, contested, they took home 7.42% of the ballot, 30 seats in the National Assembly. I mean, that was a tremendous achievement. And look, it was a particularly fraught time for the ANC. It was just after Polokwane. It was the Mbeki Zuma factionalism battles at its peak. But that, I think, is a useful, analog to what is happening with the MK party, because it has taken a relatively short space of time, 15 years, for this party to be decimated. They've now finished with 14,000 votes, not one seat in the National Assembly. Terra Lakota did say before the elections that in any event he was going to retire due to ill health. But looking back on the demise of COPE just before the elections, he said in his opinion, it was because the ANC had sent people to within COPE to undermine it from the inside. And basically what he was getting at is that the party never escaped its legacy as a fundamentally ANC breakaway party. And I think that's exactly the kind of difficulty that is going to be faced by the MK party now. And it's something that the EFF seems a little bit to have shrugged off. They certainly have a very distinct political identity now. So let's see if the MK can avoid the fate of COPE, which is now dead, gone from our electoral vision.
Sure. That's a really interesting perspective, Bex. We'll definitely get back to it. Queenin, if you could share with us what stood out for you as those elections started rolling in on May the 30th.
Thanks, Ferial. I think particularly it was the drop with the ANC numbers, right? When you look historically, the ANC has dropped by about 4-5% for every election. I think except for Thabo Mbeki, after his first term in office, ANC was at 69%. It actually increased for the very first time. But when you look at the rest of the numbers, the ANC had dropped between 4 and 5% with every election. And now you look at this election where there's a tremendous drop of 17%, because the ANC had 57% in the 2019 elections. I think that particularly stood out for me. As a reporter who was on the ground, it was completely unexpected. Because I had spoken to so many people, so many South Africans about their choices, and they were talking about the devil they know. So I was really caught off guard. So were the other political parties, definitely the ANC. The EFF also said that they didn't expect this kind of dramatic shift in the political landscape. And I think then it's a conversation to be had around closeted MK supporters. Who are these people who are behind this increase in support for the MK party? Clearly, it's not what we as political reporters were seeing on the ground. It's not what we were hearing from people. And I think we're about to see a massive change in the political landscape. I think now that the MK party has been able to garner this kind of support, all those closeted supporters may come out and openly support the party. So I think that was my greatest takeaway.
Thank you very much, Queenin, and it's lovely to be with you. Wayne, thank you for being such a brilliant navigator for the past few days and throughout the election period. I love how you look at your country with love and also with deep interest and granularity. So, what surprised you as you sat in the ENCA studio, or on the floor, or watching on your computer? Because I know you're plugged in all the time. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Ferial, and it's really great to be on this webinar with such a brilliant group of writers and journalists who did an excellent job in covering the election. So the opinion polls held, and I also want to say Daily Maverick indulges me and entertains me in every round of by-elections to do very in-depth analysis on by-elections. And the by-election trends also held in this election. I don't think that must be underestimated. There's often been this idea that by-elections are one thing, major elections are another thing. The trends we saw emerge in by-elections essentially played out in this election, maybe in a more pronounced fashion. The opinion polls were very accurate. For me, the major surprise was that the ANC plus EFF did not equal 201 seats. I think that is a seismic development in our politics. I think that is a result which is, of course, greatly upsetting for the African National Congress, but must be equally upsetting for the EFF, that they are not the kingmakers in this government. The only province where they could be the kingmakers is the Northern Cape, but there the ANC has other options. And I think that is a result which we need to maybe mull over some more.
Definitely. So, Wayne, if I could stay with you there, but just step back a little bit. So, MK is the story of this election. Could you just map for us where did their support come from? And were we at all able to anticipate what really was quite a surge that has been, like Rebecca says, the story of the election?
Thank you. So one of the things I spoke about by-elections earlier in my introduction is that new political parties do not contest by-elections. Umkhonto weSizwe contested 2 by-elections in the northern part of KwaZulu-Natal in IFP seats. But then they went to Mpumalanga, to a township just outside Secunda, and this district is probably going to become one of the most spoken about districts in the coming months, the Gert-Sibande district of Mpumalanga. Now, this is the part of Mpumalanga which borders KwaZulu-Natal. Zulu is largely spoken in many of the municipalities in this particular district. It includes places like Ermelo, Musikalikhwa, places like Wackerstroom, etc., Volksrust. And what happened, so we had, and it does include Secunda as well, which is one of the major population centers there. So in that one by-election where the MK got over 25%, we had to stand up and take notice because IFP, which is a traditional Zulu party, has never been successful in Mpumalanga. I can count one big outlier, but they've never replicated that outlier. The other thing about the IFP is that, and I did a ton of research to prepare myself for the elections. I wanted to drill deep into the 2021 results, Ferial, and let me just go off on a quick tangent because of the emergence of ActionSA and PA. And I'd always heard this thing that the IFP were just a party around hostels, and that's 100% true in Gauteng. It is their support is confined around the hostel areas. So, Ferial, when you see that map of that Gert-Sibande district, much of it is purple today. It's an astonishing development. The ANC dropped 21 percentage points in the province of Mpumalanga. In 2009, the gap between Limpopo and Mpumalanga, Limpopo has always been the stronghold of the ANC, was, I think, 0.4%. So it was very close in 2009. Now to see a gap emerge of, my numbers are not exactly right, but a 21 percentage point gap between Limpopo and Mpumalanga is astonishing. And let me just finish off there. We saw this not just in Ekurhuleni, because we know a lot of townships in Ekurhuleni are majority Zulu speaking, like Kwatema, like Duduza, but also in places like Dobson, where I know Zulu's spoken, but you still saw major breakthroughs. It is absolutely astonishing when you drill down deep into a granular level. Just to conclude, and what is left of that ANC map in KwaZulu-Natal? Okay, so again, in preparation for election night, I drilled deep into every municipality from a 2019 perspective.
Yes.
And I think the IFP were the majority party in 4 or 5 very rural northern KwaZulu-Natal municipalities. Today, I think the IFP came first in 6 or 7 rural municipalities. They were not able to build on their success in places like Richards Bay and Newcastle. The rest of the map, bar for 2 municipalities, is MK. Now, what are the 2 municipalities where the ANC came first in? Greater Kokstad and Umzimkhulu. This is where the Xhosa is the dominant language, is the most spoken language. These are astonishing. So again, we take a step back, look at the map of Gauteng today, look at the map of KwaZulu-Natal, look at the map of some Gauteng townships. It is absolutely astonishing.
Thank you very much for painting that map for us. Really, really important. Bex, if I can come back to your opening position about COPE, that was interesting. Do you think that that's going to be what happened to what will happen to MK?
You know, Ferial, I've been watching a lot of interviews with Duduzile Zuma Sambudla, who's a figure who really fascinates me, and I know that you and I could talk about that all day. But she has said openly that their aim is to, she uses terms like restore the ANC, to bring the ANC back to the ANC we love and trust. So it's almost as if there's a baked in assumption that at some point this party will be drawn back into the fold of the ANC. I don't know to what degree that is shared, because as we know now, it seems very clear that there's a very chaotic underpinning to this party. I mean, if there are any indeed, it seems like an autocracy. We now understand that it is, for instance, the former president, Jacob Zuma, who will anoint the MPs who will be going to the National Assembly, which is really unprecedented. I mean, I think we should stress this. That is not how party politics work in this country. You go to a Congress, you have an election, you know, there is a democratic process.
Yes.
So this party is already throwing all of that into the bin. So we just have no way of knowing what is going to happen. But it seems very clear that there's very little in the way of, you know, an attempt to build party structures from the ground up necessarily. I mean, that is one of the things that is so confounding to me about their performance in places like Mpumalanga, in places like Limpopo, is that there was no sense, I think, for us as journalists beforehand that they actually had a national footprint to that degree with organizers on the ground. We're now coming to terms with the fact that apparently they must, but it's still very clear that there isn't a kind of organized party structure. So how that plays out, in terms of the ongoing factional battles of Jabulani Khumalo, the initial leader of the party, who has now, you know, made various claims, including that this is essentially just a Zuma family vehicle of a party. How that plays out, we have no idea. But there's no reason to believe that there will be any stability here. I think the centrifugal tensions of their factionalism will pull them apart as much as the rent-seeking nature of their candidates. I mean, it is also very clear that these are people with grudges against the ANC, people who've been pushed out for various forms of wrongdoing. This is not, you know, the A team that we're talking about here. So I think a party that is so fundamentally built on grudges and grievances probably doesn't have the healthiest shelf life.
Thank you very much. Queenin, so, you know, I've been working Gauteng a lot, and I must say the MK showing in Gauteng didn't surprise me so much, because when we were going out, I saw many, many branches. I saw how well organized. I saw really full membership books. And organically full membership books. I saw how much people loved the swag, the caps, the T-shirts, the golf shirts. So I wasn't so surprised. It struck a chord. What do you think, Queenin? Do you think that we might see the ANC and MK trying to find each other again? I've certainly been watching that as a developing trend.
Maybe in Gauteng, it depends on the MK party's terms and conditions, Ferial, because they have set up very high terms, including the removal of President Cyril Ramaphosa as the leader of the ANC. So I don't know if that would then apply for any coalitions at provincial level. But what I do know is the ANC has been very firm about not allowing any other political party to interfere in its internal party battles, and that they will not be removing their party president because of the MK party. But there is a huge possibility that there are talks in that regard, especially for Gauteng. The ANC only got 34%, which is very low. So they have to be a bit more open when it comes to coalition partners in Gauteng, for sure, yeah.
Thank you so much. Let's take our audience into the talks for a little bit. We've got many questions coming up, but I do, because we have like a front row seat, Wayne, give us some ideas using your numbers and your great knowledge here. What are the likely permutations? And is there even such a thing?
For the coalitions, I think there are three scenarios, simple scenarios on the table, and we can obviously add and subtract for them. The first is the ANC and the MK. That's a simple majority, I think, of 200, well over 200 seats. I think it's 216 seats. I don't remember the exact number. And that will give you a comfortable majority. But as Queenin said, that is quite complicated. And that's a scenario in the lead up to the election. I personally, if I was advising the ANC, would warn against, because if you bring MK into your government today, what would stop? And I'm not saying there's another person of the stature of Jacob Zuma out there, but what would stop a disgruntled ANC leader in the Northwest, Limpopo, or Eastern Cape doing that next time? The second scenario is also quite a simple scenario, because you have Gates and McKenzie advocating for it, is the ANC, the EFF, and the Patriotic Alliance. Let's call that the Johannesburg scenario, where, I mean, McKenzie would want Home Affairs, to be honest. Maybe he'd be happy with transport. I don't think they'd be so greedy. But again, there is obviously with certain NEC members ideological compatibility with the ANC, but I think for some NEC members it's very difficult to be dependent on the EFF. By the way, that scenario would give you also reasonably over the 200 seat mark. I think it's about 206 seats.
ANC, EFF, PA.
PA, so that's about 206 seats. Then the one which I see a lot of questions coming about, I don't think the ANC and the DA are going to just do a straight deal. So let's bring in the third party. I've seen a lot of memes, the IFP. So the ANC, the DA, and the IFP would give you almost well over 260 seats. I might be a bit out. I'm not as sharp today, but I think it's over 260 seats. I would like to add a little caveat there, and that's the United Democratic Movement. Why do I say that, Ferial? Because the DA, the IFP, and the UDM, even though it was modest, they all grew in this election. And this was when we take a step back, this is a hard election to grow in with the advent of two parties, MK and PA. And why the UDM? They're not part of the multi-party charter. They're economically slightly more, they're definitely more left than most parties in the multi-party charter. Bantu Alamisa is someone of standing. He finally focused on the Eastern Cape in his campaign. That's why I think they grew. And that would be a healthy majority. But whatever decision the ANC makes, I mean, obviously it's far better if they want an outright majority, but that's not the case here. And they've got to pick their poison, and this is very, very hard poison to pick.
I want to come back to in a little bit, who you and I, three of us who live in Joburg, is how does an ANC EFF PA government feel? How does it work? Not very well, in my opinion. Bex, so I've been hearing from some ANC people that the DA people don't speak nicely to them. And these kind of things are important when you're trying to negotiate a government. What's the gap between these two parties, and how do you see things shaping? You've written a lovely overview this morning.
That's a very interesting point about tone. I mean, this is one of the things that the DA is most heavily criticized for. And I must say, I did have slight reservations when I saw the negotiating team that the DA was sending, even though, as you rightly say, people like Tony Leon obviously know more than probably any of us combined about South African politics, about the electoral system. He was there in the constitutional negotiations, but he's interpersonally abrasive. You know, he can be abrasive, and this is the case for a lot of those DA figures. And unfortunately, these things matter, particularly around the negotiating table, which I think is why someone like Rolf Meyer, who you beautifully interviewed, was so successful. When it comes to policy positions, the DA and the ANC, look, the difficulty is that the DA has spent a decade trying to make the point that there is, quote, clear blue water between them and the ANC, right? I mean, this has been their entire appeal to the electorate. So now we're facing a situation where both parties potentially are going to have to say, okay, well, no, I mean, we can work together on a whole range of stuff. That was all over.
Let's rescue South Africa together.
Together, that's right. Economically, there's not a world apart between these two parties. But obviously, there are key pieces of legislation that the DA has vehemently rejected. I mean, it's the NHI bill. It's Black economic empowerment. You know, it's the Bella bill. There's a range of stuff on which these parties are diametrically opposed. Then we all know foreign policy, which has come to the fore so drastically in the last 2-3 years. Ukraine and Russia, Israel, Palestine. Massive issues. I mean, there's no world, for instance, in which the DA could be, I don't know, given Durko or something because of those kind of ideological differences. It's very interesting to me because we do have such a polarized body politic, right? Just in terms of our parliamentary discourse and the rest of it. But for many of us, this is just such a fascinating moment. What would it mean? What would it look like for these two parties to work together? You know, Dion George, who's the DA's spokesperson on finance, sent out a statement this morning or yesterday, which had the old DA tone of critique. You know, it was, these policies have failed, bang, bang, bang. And I was wondering, is that a wise thing at this moment? You know, should there not be a kind of party-wide diktat to say, can we just hold off on these like very bold policy critiques until these coalition negotiations are done? I mean, I don't envy anyone in this situation.
But see the statements out of Joburg, where same thing. I don't know how they're going to reach over the divide. Queenin, you spend your time covering both parties. What's the chances for them sitting around a table and finding each other?
At this point, Ferial, I need to be honest. I don't see it happening. I hate to be the person to say this, but a strong sense from also the DA camp saying that, you know, we just need to go through the policy hurdle first, and that's going to be a very hard one in the first place, because who is going to compromise? What is the cost of this compromise? Because remember, for each party, they need to please their electorate and constituency at this point. And, you know, as a political party, you need to think ahead. What consequences will this have in the next election? Because now your electorate will know that you are willing to compromise key legislation that benefits them in the name of governing. So that comes into play very strongly, even from the DA's camp. It's about the model in which they need to get into this coalition with the ANC, and making sure that everyone in the federal executive in the DA agrees with it. And certainly in the ANC, there's a big pushback, a petition that's been signed online saying that you know, there are members in the party who do not want this to go ahead. There should be no DA-ANC conversation at all because of the differences in policy, and particularly or potentially rather a picket outside Luthuli House tomorrow, when the ANC is due to have a conversation around where they would be going with the matter.
Sure. Thanks, Queen. How long is that petition? Have you had a look at how are many people signing it?
You know, I saw it at the beginning, which was like yesterday. So
Okay.
I'm not sure at this point, but it's definitely something we need to follow up on as DM.
Thank you very much. So there's hundreds of questions, guys. I'm going to whoop through them as quickly as I can, starting with you, Wayne, from Charlie. I'm horrified by the MK result and the intransigence following them. Who would have thought MK was going to balance the landscape to that extent? Then another one, would love to hear your views about the ANC announcement that it's going to make a government of national unity. I don't think there's such an announcement made, but the government of national unity idea certainly has been floated quite a bit. Wayne?
So just very quickly on the appeal of MK, we know that King Goodwill Zwelithini died, and that left a void in KwaZulu-Natal. We also know that Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi passed away. That left a void in KwaZulu-Natal. And we also know the institution of the African National Congress in KwaZulu-Natal, which has had, and I'm talking about them as leaders, not the fact that they are ethically compromised. People like Zweli Mkhize, no longer as prominent as they were, and people like Sponiso Duma stepping up. So you've had major institutions in KwaZulu-Natal which have given KwaZulu, which have been breached, which are a shadow of their former selves right now. And I think this has allowed Jacob Zuma to step into that breach and step into this vacuum and just shock so many of us. I mean, you saw the large queues. Who would think that in eThekwini, the largest city in KwaZulu-Natal, that MK would be so strong now? And I think it's, again, doing the speeches in Zulu. He's relatable. He is charming. He's able to relate to people far better than any other ANC leader in KwaZulu-Natal. And I think that needs to be understood to explain this MK moment. Yes.
Wayne,
Thanks,
can I
Wayne.
also say something?
Please,
Can I add to what Wayne was saying?
Please.
Also, what has been a huge disadvantage for the ANC is their relationship with the royal house. They have continuously been on the back foot when it comes to that. The IFP has really made a huge effort to have a good relationship with the Zulu royal house, which has helped them over the years. The ANC chairperson in KZN, Siboniso Duma, recently was in a tiff with the royal house, which is not really appealing when you look at it. You were seen as being very disrespectful towards their senior leaders there. So that really did also work against them. I also want to mention that Zuma in his manifesto has a lot of emphasis on the role of Zulu, and not only Zulu royals, but just traditional leaders as a whole. And he wants to expand their role in society, saying that they've kind of been shrunk into the periphery, and he wants them to have more agency to make decisions, especially around the communities that they lead and govern. So I think that has become very appealing when you look at MK, especially in relation to KZN.
Thank you so much. From Gail, Rebecca, if they are in a coalition, will the DA become more inclusive rather than a white-orientated party?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Wayne, I'd love to draw you in here. So we heard John Steenhuisen in what I must say is characteristically ungracious fashion. One of his first comments was, quote, "I got more black votes than my Mane did as leader." Now, it seems to me, and I'm not an expert like you, but when you look at those votes, it seems very clear that the DA's tiny growth is entirely attributable to winning those disgruntled voters back from the Freedom Front Plus. Wayne, are you able to say, is there evidence that the DA grew their vote in, for instance, the townships this election season?
I haven't done a deep dive, but I know there are two particular parts in South Africa where the DA did grow amongst black voters, but that's not across the length and breadth of the country. Where were those places? Putati Jaba in the Free State, which is obviously the former Kwakwa, close to the Lesotho border, and also in Mfuleni, Thunderbale Park, where there was quite sizable growth in certain townships, which is a fascinating development about a Midvaal effect. So, but the rest, when I did some deep dives, it was 1% down or 1% up or 2% down and 1% up. So, but there wasn't massive growth across the board. It's hard to quantify that right now.
So I'm going to take one from David, who asked, can you discuss voter turnout and its implications going forward? Any of you like to take that one? Wayne?
Yeah. So look, what's interesting, and we just spoke, differential turnout is everything in an election. And this is why I think the DA in KwaZulu-Natal, one of the provinces they really thought they'd do well in is KwaZulu-Natal. But with KwaZulu-Natal, it's 62% voter turnout, and that was because of the energy behind the MK. This, for me, Ferial, is a fundamental challenge for the African National Congress. The ANC's support didn't slide as much in 3 provinces, Limpopo, the Eastern Cape, and the Northwest.
Yes.
So remember, I just said 62% turnout in KwaZulu-Natal. In the great province of Northwest, the province where I was born, the turnout was 50%, not or 51%.
Wow.
In the Eastern Cape and Limpopo, the turnout was 52%. So you see in a place like Thulamela, Thohoyandou, the ANC getting 88, 89% of the vote. But turnout has fallen again to it's only 52%. This is a big, big challenge. And just one very, very quick point. When the IEC made that announcement during the day and election day, that a lot of people got excited. Oh, it's going to be a high turnout election. But they were very clear in their words. I mean, they said it might eclipse 65, 66%, but now we know they fell well short. I mean, just anecdotally, I vote in Johannesburg, and I have this tradition of a radio station calling me while I'm in the queue. I didn't wait. I had to wait outside my polling booth because I thought I was going to be queuing for hours. I just went straight to the front. So yes, there were parts of the country where there are large queues, particularly in urban areas, but in many urban areas and rural areas, there simply weren't those queues.
Yeah. So turnout in Soweto, I looked at, as well as Shwane Kuruleni, quite low, and that would explain, Queen, and why the ANC got 36%. I need to go look there. For you, Queen, Judy Wessels, I was expecting more from Rise Mzansi. Was this wishful thinking on my part? What happened to them? Or did they... why didn't they do as well as could be expected for a new party? MK seems to be the exception, it seems.
For sure, I think there were a lot of expectations around Rise, particularly because they had such a great campaign. I could say overall, they were able to travel throughout the country. They had one of the political parties with the most posters, visibility. I think they ticked all the boxes when you look at that. But on the ground, I think what really stood out was political parties that already had constituencies somehow. And when you look at MK, of course, Zuma, someone who's known politically, he didn't have to work as hard to get people on the ground to notice him. I think the same could be said about the PA. It was their first time contesting nationally. However, because they had done provincial or rather local elections before, they already do have some kind of constituency. Their leaders had various positions already. So on visibility, I think that's how the other 2 parties did better than Rise and Mzansi. I do also think that Rise, Bossa, and ActionSA were kind of, going after the same constituency more or less. I'm not saying that their policy is completely uniform, but I think that could have been one of the reasons why, because a lot of people felt as if, why didn't Musi just join ActionSA and work with Herman so they can have one stronger party? There were a lot of questions around that. And then maybe it could be that Rise Mzansi was also a victim of being grouped and bulked into those political parties. And maybe that's why we see this result today.
Can I just come in? Can I just come in here for a sec, Ferial? So I interviewed Songezo a few months ago, and I put this point in because everyone was saying it. Why don't you and Musi Maimane, why don't you join forces, etc.? And he made an interesting argument to me, which was that he thought there was a kind of racism behind that, in that he was like, what, the assumption is that because we're both sort of black middle class politicians, there should be like an automatic rapprochement. He suggested, he was questioning basically whether we would ask the same of, I don't know, the Freedom Front Plus and the DA, although obviously there is a language difference there. But there does seem to be this assumption that, oh, you're all going for the same thing, just come on, muck in together. And maybe, and look, maybe there is a kind of pragmatism in that. For me, one of the most surprising election results actually was that Build One South Africa, both with Musi Maimane, got virtually an identical result to Rise and Mzansi. Because to me, from the outside, it seemed like Rise had done so much more in terms of, these community meetings, in terms of national structures, whereas Bosa seemed so purely a kind of Maimane vehicle that I think Bosa should be very, very happy with the results of sending two MPs to the National Assembly and one to the Gauteng legislature.
Yeah. That's exactly the same as Rai sends her. So can you just quickly share with us, you interviewed Herman Mashaba on the results floor. Disappointing outcome for ActionSA?
Yeah, they were putting a very brave face on it. They attributed some of their losses to the MK party, which I found a little implausible, I'll be honest, Ferial, because it seems to me that they're not really fishing in the same waters politically. I don't know what you guys think about that, but that seems like an odd argument. The other thing was that, Herman Mashaba is at the top of the party list. I asked if he was going to parliament. He would neither confirm or deny, but I think it is very clear that he is not going to parliament, that he will say, and he claims, build the party from the outside, which may, again, be a pragmatic decision. But it does raise the possibility that ActionSA is going to be kind of conferred to a hung status, where Mampela obviously famously won 2 or 3 seats, then sort of washed her hands of it and left these Ahang MPs stranded in parliament to have very little discernible impact. So it remains to be seen. ActionSA has, 5 or 6 MPs, so they have a few more. But I think that is one of the disappointing stories of the elections for them. They were aiming at 1.4, at least 5%. They ended up with 1.6%. Who can say? I think that the xenophobia of their policies will have turned off sort of a certain segment of like a middle-class voting population who might otherwise have taken their votes to Rise or to Bosa as an alternative, and whereas the people who are very into those xenophobic policies, I think, would have found a more comfortable political home with Patriotic Alliance, who are so brazen and so offensive on that particular policy stance.
Thank
Can
you.
I say, Bex, the other thing about ActionSA that I find quite interesting, when I spoke to the chairperson, Michael Beaumont, his view was that they got into the multi-party charter pact with the DA, and this is a pact that only benefited the DA because they were able to kind of garner more support. I don't know how true this is, but he believes that the DA used this to their advantage, and DA could have taken some votes from them, from people thinking, oh, if you vote for the DA, you're voting for ActionSA. And as you see things unfolding right now, there is no multi-party charter. So he really felt quite robbed in the moment. He felt as if they were a bit swindled by that pact.
Thanks so much, Queenin. So I just want to read you guys a halala, and there's lots here. This is from Henning Melba. Kudos to the Daily Maverick team for the integrity and competence in covering politics. And he's from Uppsala in Sweden. Thank you, Henning. He also asked if the DA and ANC find sufficient common ground for a shared governance architecture, would a big coalition be more likely, or an ANC minority government in return for privileges to the DA in Parliament? That is the confidence and supply thing that we're all coming to know so intimately. Any of you want to grab that on?
Yeah, I'll just...
Sure.
Okay, you go, Rebecca, you go.
No, I said nothing.
It's actually Queenin. Okay,
Queenin,
so can I say, yeah, from what I understand, the confidence and supply model is one that's dominant in the DA's federal executive at the moment. This is what they all want, because when you look at the consequences of actually getting into a coalition with the ANC, is that there will be collective blame for anything that goes wrong. The DA doesn't want to be associated directly with the ANC. They don't want to be in a position where they're blamed for the ANC's failures at all. And that is why that model is becoming more dominant in that space. And then when it comes to the coalition model, of course, it's beneficial in the sense that there will be DA members getting positions, getting the opportunity to prove what it is they can do as potentially ministers, deputy ministers, or anything else, which is great for the party, but it just means that there'll be a lot of compromise. As I said before, will the voters understand that they had to take these compromises in order to get these positions? So it's really complicated.
Thank you, Queen. Wayne, you wanted to come in?
Just very briefly, the confidence and supply agreement, how does it benefit the ANC? And we've got to be, I always say politicians are rational actors. The one advantage of the DA deal, and You've got to assume that there's some rationality. So the one thing we've got to about the confidence and supply agreement is that the ANC gets to keep can theoretically keep all the ministerial posts. So you might have people around that NEC table who say, look, we know that if we do a deal with the EFF or the MK, they're going to be greedy and want a lot of ministerial positions. In this scenario, and whether it's that they prove themselves or they enjoy the positions and perks, I'm not making an assessment on that. That is an advantage to some of the ANC people sitting around the NEC table, and I wouldn't underestimate it.
Thank you very much. Guy Harris from Claremont says, what are your panel forecasts for National, Gauteng, KZN? Rebecca, you want to have a go at any one of those?
Forecast, well, it's quite chilly. There's rain on the horizon. No, do you mean in terms of like the numbers in the national, the most likely governance situation? I can't honestly speak to KZN or Gauteng. I don't know enough about the situation there. My sense is that although I think a lot of analysts, the ANC veterans, there are a lot of people who agree that the most stable form of co-governance for the country would involve the DA and the ANC in some kind of situation. It does seem to be that there is a tremendous and growing political pushback from COSATU, for instance, who have basically said that if the ANC gets into bed with the DA, they are out of the alliance. Various provincial structures of the ANC, the Western Cape, for instance, has said it's a non-starter for them. So for the ANC to sell the DA, I think is going to be very, very difficult. At the same time, let's look at the role of political egos in this. Is the ANC really willing to get into bed with MK, given what Jacob Zuma has done in terms of effectively bringing them below majority, you know? And as Wayne said, this is setting a very clear precedent of the dangers of kind of a past leader shunned, knows no, hell hath no fury like a past leader shunned. The EFF as well, you know, these are tremendous egos in the picture. And the idea of the EFF, the ANC and MK coming together equally seems implausible to me. There is the Ramaphosa sticking point as well. My sense is that perhaps we're going to end up with some kind of cobbled together arrangement involving smaller parties, the IFP, the Patriotic Alliance, maybe parties to whom the ANC can sell more effectively within their own structures. I think it's going to be very difficult.
Thank you. I can speak to the Gauteng a little bit. So this was where I've been covering and where I really thought that an ANC EFF government, if it was going to happen anywhere, would be here because of how close the parties are. They together didn't get enough to create a majority. But I think Gauteng is going to be really, really interesting because you're going to see a big push for there to be an ANC-DA alliance here to run this crucial province. But I think great pushback from the ANC in Gauteng against such an option. Queenin, what do you think?
Yes, I do think that Gauteng is a place where EFF and ANC could easily work together, simply because the Gauteng leaders are former youth leaguers, just like Julius Malema. They have a long history together and even a friendship. It's easier to work with them. They've been doing that in Ekurhuleni and in the city of Johannesburg. Yes, you are right. There are other players who would have to come in. The Patriotic Alliance seems to be quite willing in Gauteng to work with the ANC. They have said that it would be an easy job because they also are part of the alliance or the coalition in Joburg. But possibly the most stable one would be ANC-DA, as you are saying. At this point of the coalition talks, what I do understand is that there has been no push to kind of align throughout the other provinces if it is that they do on a national level. So that hasn't really come.
So there
it hasn't come across.
They're not creating linkage. No. If you do this, then you get that provincially. Huh?
Not at all, because also the DA is trying to make sure that the ANC doesn't ask them for anything in terms of the Western Cape. They really just do not. So they're kind of trying to unlink in any other part so that they are free to make their own decisions pertaining the provinces where they have done well. So it's going to be interesting to look at what could happen. And of course, in KZN, the ANC has their back against the wall. It's really not looking good for the ANC. The most likely coalition would be with the IFP. But if you know, the IFP has signed an agreement with the DA. It's been a long-standing agreement with the DA to work with them, and that's why the IFP in some by-elections have won. And that's obviously before the entry of MK. It's because in some by-elections, if they could tell that the DA could tell, okay, we don't have enough support, they'd say, we're going to tell all our supporters to vote for the IFP so you can win the ward. And that's how they've been punishing the ANC in KZN. So if they do get into an agreement with the MK party, it's kind of going to be a betrayal on their part, because they have this long-standing agreement they've signed with the DA. So it's going to be very interesting to watch there.
Thank you. So many questions here. If I'm going to put it to Rebecca first. What's the significance of not expelling JZ from the ANC when he is so fully invested in another party, Judy Wessels? Do we know who's funding MK? Is there an obligation for political parties in South Africa to disclose their funding?
Great questions. Okay, I have seen the question come in multiple times, who is funding MK? I want you all to rest assured that as journalists, not just at Daily Maverick, throughout the country, we are seized with this question. We are very vigorously looking into it. I mean, there are rumors swirling about, foreign businessmen and foreign powers and the rest of it. There's no evidence for that currently, but I promise you, it is very clear that the party has money. In fact, that's one of the fears, that they can use money to sort of buy off people. We're looking into it. We don't know the answer right now. The Political Party Funding Act requires all political parties to disclose donations of over 100,000 rand. They are not doing it. It is clear that that legislation, especially now that it's been amended, is basically dead in the water. And we need desperately some kind of national conversation about what we're going to do to amend that situation. I mean, the problem is that it's been unpopular with political parties from the get-go. All political parties felt that it would cause potential funders to withdraw from the DA to the... All parties basically had mixed feelings about this. What we have seen is that certain parties disclose, others definitely don't. The EFF very rarely discloses any money, yet clearly have money for lavish rallies and posters. Freedom Front Plus almost never discloses, but many people think they are awash in Stellenbosch money. So it's not working, and we have to have a conversation about what we're going to do about that.
Can you just comment on it, how it's going to... The Electoral Matters Amendment Act now has changed the threshold for declaration. How will that change things?
Yeah, I don't know enough about the details of that yet. I haven't had time to look into it. But I mean, we've seen this coming. The problem is the loopholes are so extensive. And we saw this just in the lead up to the elections, where it seemed like Rise and Mzansi had received a 15 million rand donation from within its own structures by setting up another body in order to obscure the identity of the donor. This happens across the board. The ANC does it through Chancellor House. It's nothing new. It's not even technically illegal. But we need to close those loopholes before we even start looking at, lifting thresholds and the rest of it.
So if Rise has got 3 representatives at 30 million rand, that's 10 million rand each. That's very expensive. Politics so expensive to get into office. From Kim Webster, Wayne, is there any discernible trend amongst 18 to 35-year-old voters, please?
It's a great question. It's hard for me to analyze. Just some deep dives I did is that EFF did do well amongst younger voters around university campuses or where student housing is, but I don't have anything definitive on turnout. So I'm sorry, I can't answer that beautiful question properly.
I think it's really worth looking into. Queen, do you want to begin to paint the differences between a government of national unity, a coalition, and then the third option is confidence and supply?
Okay, confidence and supply, as we spoke earlier, it's about potentially it would be the ANC getting all the executive positions, which is the ministerial posts, and then the party that they get into this agreement with would then be in charge of the legislature, which means parliament, and would probably have its own speaker. So parliament would completely be run by them, and they would be the watchdog over the executive, which is kind of an ideal setup to see if the ANC will be able to govern with another party.
Mm.
And then when you look at the coalitions are sadly a very bad example here in South Africa at local
Very
level,
bad.
where political parties just come together. Basically, the aim of a coalition is to reach 50% plus one. Usually, it is about give and take. What can you give me in return for these votes? I believe they're very surface level when you look at coalitions, especially here in South Africa at local level. But I think the government of national unity is more about shared principles. It would take. I think I look at the 1994 example, and it's usually about making sure that there is a smooth and peaceful transition. It's also about ensuring that the parties, or as many parties, participate in the formation of the government, so that it represents as many South Africans as possible. So very representative of the country itself. And also it's as I said, mostly about setting out kind of the path forward that these parties would like to secure, the main goals that these political parties will be looking towards as a unit and a bloc. And something very important to note, I think, maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, Fair, but I think with both GNU and coalitions, unfortunately, if it is that someone pulls out and they fall beneath a certain percentage, it's unstable.
Yeah,
Can
I
I,
think
Vero, can I just,
yes, please.
sorry, can I just jump in with some breaking news, which is that the ANC's National Working Committee has just released a statement on its engagements with political parties so far, and says that they have been rebuffed by the MK party thus far, that they have received no positive response. They've repeatedly reached out to the MK party and are getting nowhere. So that's a very interesting
Can I say
development.
something, Bex?
Yes,
It's
please.
so funny. It's so funny. So I've been talking to like people in the ANC, and they were talking about how they were being blue ticked on WhatsApp by MK members, and how they were desperate.
Why'd you do that?
Yeah,
You say, hi, can we have a meeting? And no one gets back to you.
no, and then they read the message, and you see, oh my word, this person's read my message, but he's not gonna answer me. So they sent a couple of their leaders, some they think would get along with the MK party, to say, please just text them, maybe they'll respond to you. They're not responding. Calls, they're not answering at all. So it's so funny to know that the ANC is open about this.
Oh my goodness. Bex, so everybody, I expected that President Ramaphosa, when he got to the results center on Sunday evening, was going to be crestfallen and really like tail between his legs. In fact, he was chipper, jocular, and quite cupcakey.
Was he? Boy, was he. And we speculated somewhat facetiously that maybe he was gearing up to just chuck it all in, and that's why he was so chilled. I mean, one thing we have said repeatedly is thank God, as a nation, thank God we are going through this with President Cyril Ramaphosa at the helm, because really, I don't think we could ask for a more politically mature president in that regard. Someone who is guaranteed to say, we will accept the results of this election, we respect the will of the South African people. Can you imagine having a more hot-headed ANC leader at this time who might, I don't know, encourage all kinds of reckless behavior from the electorate? So, I mean, I just feel incredibly thankful for all his other flaws that we do have a figurehead like Ramaphosa in charge at the moment, because these are, really potentially turbulent times. We have a history of political violence in this country. It's not a joke. And thank goodness, but wherever his strange kind of nonchalance about the results coming for, maybe it was just an affectation. I'm personally quite grateful for it.
Thank you. From Brian Yule, Wayne, if there was a void in the ANC in KZN, why didn't the IFP profit as well?
Great question. We saw in by-elections, the IFP were doing very, very well. But MK, it was a tsunami. They just swept it up. Well, what's interesting about the IFP is, like, for instance, in some eThekwini wards, admittedly off a low base, they doubled their vote in some of the KwaMashu townships or some of the other outer west area of eThekwini. So they did grow. And again, I think this is the one unanswered question which we need to reflect on. Parties like the DA, IFP, UDM, as I said earlier, they did grow in this election. This was a hard environment to grow in. And the IFP were one of those parties who grew, and partly because of an increase in votes in eThekwini.
Stay with you there, Wayne. What about another arrangement? The ANC run National, the DA run Gauteng, and the IFP run KZN. Thoughts about that?
So the KwaZulu-Natal numbers would require, then, if my memory serves me correctly, so the magical number in Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal is 41 out of 80. I think the ANC, IFP, DA would still need the National Freedom Party. Now, there were rumors that the National Freedom Party, which, by the way, is not returning to the legislature and doesn't really have a strong leader,
yes,
were a project of Jacob Zuma in the early days. So what the NFP could emerge as the kingmakers. Isn't that remarkable? But that's a very, very interesting scenario, that the IFP get KwaZulu-Natal, the DA, to prove themselves in Gauteng. I think that's a scenario which is a creative one, and one we mustn't dismiss. But I just want to go through you can ask someone else another question. I just want to see if that works from a numerical perspective.
Thank you so much. We'll come back to you for that. Queen, does the history of JZ's corruption, the era of state capture, not come into play at all? And what happens to the anti-corruption drive when you have all this negotiation going on?
Yeah, it is a conversation that I've had a couple of times with people.
Yes.
When it comes to the voters, voters in South Africa, I mean, I'm a Black woman from the township, born and bred.
Yes.
And I can tell you, people in the township are not thinking about what I'm thinking about right now, which is corruption. There are bread and butter issues that they are looking at. Zuma has a historical background as the leader of the country. They still see him as a potential figure who could create change for them. So we need to just be careful about, when we talk about corruption and state capture, who we're speaking to about these issues, because for me and you, it's a big deal. But for majority of South Africans who don't have, a job and don't have food on their table, water, and all those, what seems to be very little things to us, that matters more than, corruption and state capture to them at this point. When we talk about the issue around corruption, it does play a huge role, because I believe that the DA speaks a lot about, we don't want anyone associated in the Zondo Commission or who's been implicated in the Zondo Commission to still be a part of the ANC's structures or to be in parliament while we are going to be in partnership with them, because it then says a lot about where we stand as a party, having been the party that's spoken so strongly against corruption. It would make no sense for them to do that. And that is why the confidence in supply model has become the dominant view in the DA. It's exactly that. It's a way for them to still distance themselves from any allegations of corruption or of being accused of working with any corrupt parties.
Thank you so much, Queen. I'm going to do a last round because we've got 3 minutes, and also get your wrap thoughts. So, Bex, if you could just explain how an ANC minority government would function, the idea of being able to form a minority government, and then also how do you think things will look by June 16th, which is the deadline for talks to end and for Parliament to sit, I think.
Look, can I just say, to our viewers right now, that so much of this is unknown territory to us as well as to you. This is literally an unprecedented moment for the country. Anything we're saying now is basically speculation. Somebody else asked, what will happen if a coalition government can't be formed in 2 weeks? I don't honestly know the answer to that. I don't know if you do, Ferial. These are real unknown unknowns that we're dealing with here, which is why all we can call for is, political maturity and cool heads. But I imagine that there are people in every party scrambling, reading the law books, researching international precedents, and they will have been doing this, of course, in the lead up to the elections. But the truth is that there is so much up in the air at the moment, and yeah, I don't know what a minority government is. We just can't say.
Thank you, Wayne. Final thoughts.
Cynthia Shinga. is a name which I don't think many people might know. I didn't know this until a minute ago. Her phone will be ringing throughout, will be probably ringing the most in the coming weeks. She's a National Freedom Party MPL. Back to that idea, she is the queen maker in KwaZulu-Natal politics, because if MK are not taking the ANC's calls, let's assume that KwaZulu-Natal, Gauteng, and the nation is that scenario is off the table. So she's going to emerge as a very, very important person in the coming days, because her party will decide who rules KwaZulu-Natal and quite possibly can help unravel some other things across the nation. And just one other final thought. Only one leader, well, in a way, who's forced, resigned off bad results after the 2019 elections. There are a number of political parties who had a poor election. Are we going to see any resignations, any people taking accountability for their party's poor performance? That's going to be very, very interesting for me to watch in the coming days.
Thank you so much. I think we need a profile on Cynthia. Queenin, final word?
Final word is, just the way things played out with the elections, I really am open-minded about coalitions right now. What I thought was going to happen in the elections obviously didn't. And I think South Africans should really be open-minded and think about it in many different ways. I think that this is a key moment for our country, and we should also be taking note of how political parties conduct themselves in this time, because now they certainly need to look beyond themselves and their own self-interest to see what it is we can do to have a government by June 16th. I'll definitely be keeping an eye on everything. So just keep on reading Daily Maverick and getting the latest news.
Can't think of a better way to end. I wish and pray for open hearts and cool minds over this period. It's been lovely to be with you. I'm sure we'll do another of these.